Well, that was a dark speech. Holy cow, thank goodness I was eating a wonderfully cooked steak and drinking bourbon last night. The only way to make it through that thing. Great to be with you today here on the Vince Coglianese Show. Coming up, I've got Chris Bedford joining us at 3:30 from the Federalist. We'll talk to him about everything he saw out of that old president last night. Not a unifying speech, that's for sure. Joe Concha is here, 4:30 today. We'll talk to him about the media reaction. E.J. Antoni discusses the economy with us at 5 o'clock. And then at 5:30, we have a chat with Clark Judge, former speechwriter for President Ronald Reagan. We will talk to him about what he saw in that very dark speech out of the current president of the United States. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. My thanks again to all of the WMAL listeners I got a chance to watch the speech with last night. We were all out of Bourbon Boulevard and Chantilly. We had such a good time. For Steak of the Union. It was nice to get together, everybody. Please, thank you again for everybody who stopped by and said hello and enjoyed some delicious steak. By the way, just as a personal request, I said it last night to the assembled there, but I want to ask everyone to, if you're in a prayerful type, to raise your prayers for the owner of Bourbon Boulevard. Kieran is dealing with a tough family situation right now. And I don't know how much I can and should say, so I'll just say, just lift your prayers up for him. He's a good guy with a great business, but he loves the WMAL audience, and they took such good care of us last night. He couldn't be there because of the emergency he's dealing with. So again, if you've got some room in your prayers today, I'd appreciate something for him. Let me go to this speech though. Last night we were, like I said, we were in Bourbon Boulevard. I'm watching this thing and I'm trying to comment on it. Little hard to hear the president for a number of reasons. Including his inability to speak really clearly. But as we're watching the speech, there were jaw-dropping moments. Now, of course, it was predictable in its divisiveness. It was not a unifying speech at all. I've seen quite a few people suggest today that it's the darkest speech of his presidency. That might be the case. I don't know. It seems like that list is a lot of speeches in it because that includes like the speech that he gave in Philadelphia. Remember, the blood red speech at Independence Hall, where he was spending the whole time just attacking his fellow American citizen for not voting for him and calling them extremists. Disgraceful behavior on his part. He duplicated that in another speech that he gave in Pennsylvania. They pretended it was at Valley Forge. It wasn't. It was in another nearby community. But when he gave that speech, he once again attacked Americans. And last night, he did the same thing. He just gets up there and uses this as a campaign event. He didn't give us an assessment of the state of the union. He just said that the other guys are evil. Don't vote for them, which is a disgrace. The whole front of the speech was stacked with all sorts of things that had nothing to do with pressing American interests. He led with all of his foreign policy interventions, all the wars we're getting into, all of the military deployments that we're undertaking, all of the money we're sending to other countries. But he didn't focus on what is at the top of so many Americans' minds, which is the state of our border, the state of the immigration crisis, the resulting crime, the fentanyl deaths that come with that. He wasn't focused on the economy. He wasn't focused on inflation. And to the extent that he talked about any of those things, he lied about them. He suggested that they're either the fault of Republicans or they're not actually bad at all. The economy's great. The deficit's going down. Everybody's humming along. Business has never been better. Jobs are wonderful. It was gaslight after gaslight after gaslight last night. Now, here's a couple of other obvious pieces to jump into here. One, I told you yesterday that the left had already established rock bottom expectations for the speech last night. You had a report in Axios that ran yesterday morning talking about Democrats are just hoping he makes it through. They hope his age doesn't show, right? So what they did was lower expectations to subterranean levels. And if Joe Biden survives the speech, mission accomplished. It was great. He did great. And sure enough, wouldn't you know it, that's exactly the way the media has been handling this thing. Very effective. Very effective. Here's Jonathan Karl over at ABC last night.
Not by name. How many times did he say predecessor tonight?
Hey, look, this was a great night for Joe Biden, and this was much more a campaign speech than a State of the Union address. And you saw that in how he repeatedly took on Donald Trump. By my count, by our count, 16 times.
16 times he mentioned the guy who is not president of the United States right now in a speech about the State of the Union.
either say my predecessor, the former president, or other people my age, referring to Donald Trump. Very direct attacks. The most powerful one,
well, if you don't say his name, it's not exactly a direct attack.
First one, when he comes out and he first invokes Ronald Reagan, who told the Russians, who told the Soviets, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And then he said, compared.
I can't wait to ask Clark Judge about this coming up, a Reagan speechwriter. He'll be joining us at 5:30.
Donald Trump, who tells Putin, do whatever the hell you want. Very pointed, the kind of campaign
Carl, you can't be that stupid.
You just never have seen in a State of the Union, but I think very effective.
Jonathan Karl buying the lie that Donald Trump genuinely wants Vladimir Putin to invade Western Europe. That's the frame the left has been running with. Of course, when that quote, which has been taken out of context every single time it's been mentioned by the corporate press, was Donald Trump bragging about getting NATO countries to spend more money in their own defense. So it wasn't about weakening the NATO alliance. It was about strengthening it. That's what the speech was. That's the speech that Donald Trump gave. And the White House has been misrepresenting it ever since the moment it was uttered. And, of course, the media have been dutifully playing along. One of the big moments last night was, of course, Biden walking into the room and encountering a MAGA hat-wearing Marjorie Taylor Greene, which was, I just think, she nailed it last night. She said, oh, you want to attack MAGA people? Fine, I'll wear my MAGA hat. I'm not playing this game with you. I'll wear the hat. And not only did she wear the hat, she also had all sorts of things all over. If the left can dress up in political costumes every time we have one of these States of the Union, which they did last night, they were all dressed. All the ladies of the left were all dressed in white again, because apparently white is the color of abortion or something. And of course you had the anti-Israel outfits that people were wearing. They were all wearing all sorts of things. And so Marjorie Taylor Greene puts a MAGA hat on, which is about this country, make America great again. And she's got a pin on about the Biden border crisis. And she also has a thing that says, say her name, Laken Riley. And she hands one of these pins to Joe Biden. And he seemed, I don't know, he just seemed confused by the whole experience. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene last night.
Yeah, no, it's obviously very harsh times.
This is CNN covering Marjorie Taylor Greene first.
You saw him walk in. And one of the more loud members of the Republican Party, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Congresswoman from Georgia, put on a MAGA hat.
Which is not allowed.
Which is not allowed. You're not allowed to do that.
And Jake Tapper condescending about Marjorie Taylor Greene, the sitting Congresswoman who represents her constituents in Georgia.
And I mean, according to the rules of the House and Senate. And she was wearing a pin referring to Biden's border crisis, quote unquote.
Quote unquote, as if it's not actually happening. And then Marjorie Taylor Greene, here she is. This is the natural sound from the floor as Joe Biden walks past her. She hands him the pin, and she even instructs him on how to say Laken Riley's name.
Laken Riley. Laken Riley.
I know how to say the name.
Laken Riley. Say your name, Mr. President.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. President.
I know how to say the name. Laken Riley. Say her name, Mr. President. I know how to say her name. Do you? Do you? So Biden does get around to saying something that kind of sounds like Laken Riley, but it instead comes out as the head coach of USC football, Lincoln Riley. Take a listen.
I'd be a winner. Not really.
Marjorie Taylor Greene shouts out Laken Riley's name.
Laken Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right. But how many of the thousands of people being killed by illegals? To her parents, I say, my heart goes out to you, having lost children myself. I understand.
What was that? What was that entire sequence? So Biden gets her name completely wrong. He calls her Laken Riley. That's not her name. It's Laken. And then he goes on to say that she was killed by an illegal. And then he downplays it and says that thousands of people are killed by legals. That's what he sort of bumps over the phrase at that point. I think he drops a vowel. He just says thousands of people are killed by legals. What? What are you talking about? And then he brings up the loss of his own kid? It's incoherent. Incoherent. And I doubt it was any meaningful comfort to the family of Laken Riley last night to see that that was the first circumstance in which Joe Biden even said her name out loud. The White House has been avoiding like crazy every invitation to invoke her name. They say, "Oh, our thoughts are with the family. You know, our condolences to the family." But they refused. They've up until yesterday refused to say her name. I don't know what's going on here. Maybe Biden is screwing up their PR strategy to the extent that they have one. My guess is they probably didn't want him saying the wrong name, which is what he did last night. So that was crazy. So you and I hear that and we're like, that's nuts. That's nuts. That's, first of all, like, it is insulting to the family of Laken Riley. And also, he bears responsibility for this, having released her murderer into the country by virtue of his policies. And to the extent, again, he talked about any of these issues last night, he made it almost seem like he was blaming Republicans for this. Oh, we need to fix these things so these illegals or legals or whatever he's saying don't kill Americans. Thousands of them. Forget Laken Riley. There's thousands of people being killed, he said last night. Okay. So we're focused on that. You know what the left is focused on today? The fact that he used the phrase illegal to describe Laken Riley's murderer. They're obsessed with this detail today. They're going crazy over it. Nancy Pelosi was among the first people last night on CNN to react to this.
Now, you should have said undocumented, but that's not a big thing, okay? What's the big thing about it?
No, I actually wasn't even going to ask about that. I was just going to ask more about the moment. But you do think that he should have said undocumented? That wasn't going to be my question.
Oh, that's hilarious. CNN didn't even want to ask about it. And Nancy Pelosi accidentally thought they were asking about it. And so she said, it should be undocumented. But why are we even talking about this? CNN's like, well, we weren't going to.
Now, you should have said undocumented, but that's not a big thing, okay? What's the big thing about it?
I actually wasn't even going to ask about that. I was just going to ask more about the moment. But you do think that he should have said undocumented? That wasn't going to be my question.
Well, we usually say undocumented. He said.
Oh, we usually say undocumented. We're not usually the types that say illegal. We don't like being descriptive. We like manipulating language to the point that it sounds like it's totally fine. Undocumented Americans. You see the left referring to illegals as newcomers now. That whole, everything is playing with language in order to okay illegality and to distort morality and to wreck reality. Joaquin Castro last night saying there was a lot of good in President Biden's speech tonight, but his rhetoric about immigrants was incendiary and wrong. That's Joaquin Castro. Meanwhile, the abortion industry's own senator from California was on television today, and she was angry about all of this. I'm going to play this audio for you. This is LaFonza Butler, big abortion industry person. And they made her a senator, of course. And here she is.
First of all, just the moment, but also on the term he used, illegal. There's been some backlash among some in his own party for using that term.
By the way, this is the government term. The illegal alien is literally the term that the government has used forever to describe somebody who is in the country illegally and should not be here. This isn't some novel term. It's not a pejorative. It's literally descriptive.
For using that term.
Look, it was clear being in the chamber last night that there were those on the extreme Republican Party who were trying to bait the president into talking about crime and the invasion of our country. Oh, how dastardly that they try and get him to focus on issues that matter to Americans. Number one issue in the entire country right now. Those Republicans were trying to bait him into talking about it. Into responding to whatever heckle they were offering. It's unfortunate that the president used that language. I don't believe that is the language that he'll be punished. That he believes in his heart about immigrant people. She can see into his heart. She knows that he actually meant to conceal the crime of the person who killed Laken Riley. Find their way to this country to make a better life for themselves. What? What is she talking about? You know what this reminds me of? Do you remember when Nancy Pelosi was angry at Trump for calling MS-13 members animals? Do you remember that? Trump was like, they're animals. And you couldn't find a person on the street who would disagree with you. If you just left Trump out of the conversation, because that just creates this big emotional thing. But if you told him, like, hey,
gang members who chop up human beings into small parts just for the cruel, demonic enjoyment of it. Would you say that they're animals? Oh, yeah, definitely. That's animalistic behavior. What a bunch of animals who would do that. Anybody would say that. Nancy Pelosi attacked Trump for calling MS-13 animals. And here you have Democrats now upset with Biden for not using their latest iteration of Orwellian language to justify breaking our nation's laws and invading our borders. They're mad at him for that. He's really setting us back here by describing things accurately. Hey, yeah, you remember this?
We have people coming into the country or trying to come in. We're stopping a lot of them. But we're taking people out of the country. You wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people. These are animals.
That was Donald Trump 5 years ago, referencing MS-13, just the absolute horrors being brought to the United States and his efforts to stop that. And here's how Nancy Pelosi reacted to that remark.
And so when the President of the United States says about undocumented immigrants, these aren't people, these are animals, you have to wonder, does he not believe in the spark of divinity, the dignity and worth of every person?
Yeah, won't he think of the dignity of the MS-13 members who are brutalizing human beings all over the place, including right here in the United States of America? Won't he think of them? It's the same attitude that the left is taking today for Laken Riley's killer, as Joe Biden uttered that she's illegal. She's illegal. Now, Biden, that he was illegal. Biden himself has just apparently spoke to the press out in front of Air Force One at Andrews Air Force Base about all of this. Here's what he said.
Do you regret using the word illegal to describe immigrants last night, sir?
Well, I don't regret it. Technically not supposed to be here.
Well, I don't regret, technically not supposed to be here. Technically. It's like, what else am I supposed to say? They're not supposed to be here. It's illegal. It's Joe Biden. He's losing track of the spin in his own party today. Coming up, Chris Bedford joins us. He'll give us an overview of the very dark speech that the White House wrote for that guy last night. Hey, good afternoon to you. Coming up on the program, we've got Joe Concha is with us. We'll talk about the media reaction to the big hullabaloo last night on Capitol Hill, the big speech. E.J. Antoni is here. We talked the economy with him at 5 o'clock. And at 5:30, former Reagan speechwriter Clark Judge joins us, reacting to what the White House wrote up for Biden. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I do want to loop right back to the question and answer I just played a moment ago with Joe Biden standing on the tarmac. He was asked whether or not he regrets using the word illegal last night in the speech, but I missed on first pass the way that the reporter asked the question. Here's what she said.
Do you regret using the word illegal to describe immigrants last night, sir?
To describe immigrants? No. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who have come into the country illegally. They're not immigrants. And also specifically in this case, it wasn't a broad definition of all sorts of people. It was one person who murdered Laken Riley. He wasn't describing immigrants. He was describing a murderer who was here illegally. Biden, of course, said today in that answer, he said, well, I probably shouldn't have, but technically...
Well, I don't regret it. Technically not supposed to be here.
Technically, as a technical matter, I was right. Technically right. All right. What else happened last night? Well, let's talk about the rest of that speech with the great Chris Bedford. He's a senior contributor over at the Federalist, and he joins us now. Chris, good to talk to you, sir.
Great to be here.
Now, I started the show going, I know people have been saying that this speech last night was super dark. I've seen some people claim that it's the darkest of Biden's presidency, but honestly, at this point, I'm not certain it was. He's given so many dark speeches, I don't even know how to rank them, Chris.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite as dark as we saw the speech at Independence Hall in Philadelphia when he was backlit by the red. It kind of looked like somebody was cosplaying as a 1940s German. That was a very strange speech. Last night, though, was the most partisan State of the Union that I've ever heard of. I've never heard of a president saying my opponent, for example, in a speech, and he never said his name, but he referenced his opponent or his predecessor over a dozen times by my count. And, as soon as it began, literally within the first 90 seconds, he'd compared the Republican Party to Hitler and the Nazis, the Confederates, and then by 2 minutes also the Russians. And he compared himself at the same time to Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Delano Roosevelt in those first 2 minutes. And as soon as I heard that, I thought that fake historian, that crazy historian John Meacham has got to have his hands on this. He's the guy who wrote, he was famous for writing a lot of interesting histories. And he's kind of had like a brain melt since Donald Trump became president. And he wrote the Independence Hall speech for Biden. So I Googled it, and sure enough, of course, the White House was bragging that John Meacham had been in the room. Because he's the kind of guy who writes that for Biden. I mean, it took 6 minutes until we got to a single domestic issue that had to do with this union, and that was about January 6th.
Yes.
The speech was dark, and what really is interesting to me at the end is that we saw the most partisan speech I've ever heard of in the State of the Union, one of the darkest speeches I've ever heard in the State of the Union, and everyone's just kind of applauded because he was able to stand up the whole time and largely deliver his words with minimal slurring. That's a pretty low bar to clear.
Really low bar. But that was the expectations game yesterday was being set up that all day long. It was like, hey, if he can make it through the speech, Democrats are going to breathe a sigh of relief. And that's what happened yesterday. He made it through. I just want to pause for a moment on this John Meacham thing, though, because Meacham, I don't think he gets enough attention for the role that he's been playing in the Biden presidency, because he does actually write, by all available reporting, almost every one of these ridiculous speeches that Biden gives. He's often got a hand in actually writing them. And I noticed some time ago, for instance, John Meacham's book in 2018, the name of the book was The Soul of America, The Battle for Our Better Angels. What does that sound like? Well, it sounds like every Joe Biden speech at the beginning of his presidency. Remember the battle for the soul of America? Those were all John Meacham speeches. He's just hawking his book by way of the president of the United States. The cover art to John Meacham's Soul of America book is now hanging in the Oval Office over Joe Biden's right shoulder as you stare at the Resolute desk, because John Meacham picked the artwork out. So, I mean, in terms of just like the people who are handling Biden and manipulating him, this guy is right there at the center.
He is, and he's someone who I think just a couple of years ago, maybe 10 years ago, was fairly well regarded as an expert American historian. And it's kind of that cult of experts thing that happens where you assume that someone really knows what they're talking about when they're on a subject that you don't really know anything about.
Right.
And then once they get onto a subject that you actually understand, you realize that that person is a lunatic. It's a complete, total crazy person. And John Meacham has really outed himself as that. He's been in the president's ear since the very beginning. And the White House, you know this, because the White House always brags about it.
Yes.
They always say John Meacham came by, and they leak it to the Washington Post or send it to Playbook or somewhere else. And from the beginning, he's been telling Joe Biden, who's obviously an enfeebled old politician and a compromised candidate for the Democrats, it's important to beat Donald Trump, been telling him that he's the next Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that he is Abraham Lincoln, that his part is in history, and that his enemies are the enemies of civilization. And Joe Biden believes it.
And the two men have a symbiotic relationship. So Biden wants historians to write glowing hagiographies about him. And the historians, in this case, John Meacham, he spends his career writing about dead presidents. He finally has an actual living president as his plaything, and he's going to exploit that to no end.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty sick back and forth relationship. Although Biden was able to accomplish something last night. I think that in his speech, he was probably able to shore up his left flank and push back against Democrats were getting really worried. You heard about it in the New York Times. It's basically in near open rebellion with their choice, the fact that he's running again. The polls are so bad over and over again. And last night, his ability to spar and stand up to that speech, even though it was dark and even though it was grim, and even though I would guess that most of Americans who were watching had gone to sleep by the time he got to immigration or other major issues, he was able to shore up some support with the Democratic Party and let them know that he was still – it seemed like the kind of speech a president who was still going to stick with it and for the next re-elect came with.
You noticed something that I too noticed, which is the priorities. If you're giving an address of any kind, or if you're speaking to a group of people and you want to convey that you care about the issues they care about, you usually lead with the most pressing concern. That's not what Joe Biden did last night. Biden started with things like funding the war in Ukraine, he emphasized that we need more human sacrifice as a country. He did a big push for abortion without actually using the word abortion because of how unpopular that phrase is. And it was only very late in the speech that he even brought up immigration or the economy. What did you make of that?
Yeah, his number one thing that he got to after demagoguing his opponents and coming up with a good joke at the beginning was Ukraine. And I think that's because that's a near and dear to his legacy. The idea that the Republicans are on the side of Putin and Democrats are on the side of the great holy Ukraine is essential. I mean, and that's just a disaster in itself because even our military and intelligence services know that that's a war that's being lost, and this money is just going to an absolute meat grinder. After that, he went to IVF, and you're right, he never once said abortion. He talked about different things like the care they need or life-saving care or medical care or choice or freedom. Those are the words he tried to hide the subject with. It was only after 10 p.m. I know he was 20 minutes late because of the left-wingers, probably because of the left-wingers protesting him in the street for Palestine. He was after 10 p.m. that he get to the economy. And on the economy, he said everything's great. Or if it's not great, it will be great soon. Yeah. I mean, you even had David Axelrod out there saying, well, I don't know if the triumphalism on the economy is something that fits the mood of most viewers. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until even later that he got to immigration, which is something that I know the White House doesn't understand, that Jen Psaki doesn't understand. Joe Biden seems to understand it. He seems to know that they're in trouble on this. That's why he tried to actually talk about it in his sparring with Marjorie Taylor Greene. They know that they're in some trouble on this, but it's so against the actual priorities of this White House and the actual policy of this White House. They kind of had to tuck it in at the back, and they checked that box.
Yes.
And the president did it forcefully in the end, but checked that box without actually trying to really upset their base. You notice when he was talking about the immigration deal, half the Democrats didn't even stand up to cheer. They don't like it.
Yeah. No, it's just awful. I mean, what we're dealing with is awful. And that bill, of course, was awful. It was a giant amnesty package dressed up as border security. Biden had a moment last night where he was threatening and menacing the justices of the Supreme Court, the few who now show up to these things anymore. They've become more and more partisan, especially under Biden. And remember, this was over the issue of abortion. In at least one case, Brett Kavanaugh was subjected to an assassination attempt over the pending Dobbs decision. Here's Biden last night attacking the Supreme Court.
With all due respect, justices, women are not without electoral power. Electoral or political power. You're about to realize just how much you're right about that.
Now, even that framing, of course, is predicated on a lie that the Supreme Court said that women don't have political power. They never said any such thing, Chris Bedford.
No, they just said that very obviously wrongly decided Roe v. Wade by not just my estimation, but by a lot of liberal justices' estimation, by Ruth Bader Ginsburg's estimation, yes. Roe v. Wade was a poorly decided decision. So that didn't work. That was no longer the law of the land. And they tossed the ball back to Congress and back to the president themselves. And they have to actually do something. They can't just hide behind this thing that D.C. politicians have hid behind for so long. And it's a useful tool for them because, I mean, if you look at the voting blocks that are so important to a lot of the Democratic Party, they're losing support amongst Black Americans, losing support amongst Hispanics. They're losing support, of course, amongst the white working class. But a major constituency that is unflappable is single college-age women. Childless single college-age women are essential to the Democratic coalition. And you saw a lot of them screaming in the streets at Joe Biden over Gaza and Hamas. So you're going to win those back. You need to talk about their two favorite things, Hamas and abortion.
Right. Yes. And in case you're wondering, I mean, the whole plan is to keep them single and childless in order to keep that political coalition together. Biden also discussed another fiction last night, this idea that the American right is trying to ban important books or something. Of course, what he's referencing in a dishonest way is the effort by parents to keep pornography out of schools, literally just pornography. That's it. And here's Biden last night. Remember, his administration pressured Amazon to remove books about COVID that disagreed with their policies.
Stop denying another core value of America, our diversity across American life. Banning books, it's wrong. Instead of erasing history, let's make history. I want to protect fundamental rights. Pass the Equality Act. And my message to transgender Americans, I have your back.
If you are transgender, I have your back, said Joe Biden last night. Is that eye on the ball, do you think?
That's wonderful. It's classic. It's the kind of Democratic priority that this White House has put forward, but that the American populace is largely disinterested in. I mean, remember, Joe Biden was not the first pick of really the Democratic Party. Just kind of like Hillary Clinton, who when they wanted Bernie Sanders more like it, but the DNC and powerful leaders put Hillary Clinton ahead. Joe Biden was a compromise candidate because all of the other people he was running against in the 2020 primary were so far to the left. They wanted open borders. They were pushing the trans stuff, whereas Biden was supposed to be the guy who was going to beat Trump because he spoke more to allegedly moderate ideas. He's always had that character, but if you actually look at his politics, if you look at him as vice president, if you disregard his early career in the Senate, he's always been pretty actually far to the left, just with a better delivery. And his White House, which he doesn't seem to be running that well, his policy people are pushing those same policies that you would have gotten no matter who you had as a Democratic nominee. They're pushing these left-wing ideas. And they're also, I wonder how much it's ringing true, because they've been trying, for example, to hang illegal immigration and the border wall on Republicans as opposed to Democrats. So the polling shows that so far that's not working. They're trying to hang, they tried to hang the problems with crime and with police defunding on Republicans. People weren't buying that. The book banning thing seems to have worked so far because of the corporate media has really repeated that it's book banning to stop your children from reading pornography in third grade. Mm-hmm. But most of their things are they're running short and they're running scared. And the polling showing that Joe Biden was supposed to be this healer, this grandfatherly figure. They're not even trying to stick with that message anymore. They're just trying to show that he can stand up and, I guess, beat Donald Trump.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think it does signal it's going to get darker from here. But in the meantime, Chris Bedford, thank you very much from the Federalist for your insights today. Really appreciate it. Let's check in on the phones. I've got Kevin calling in from Manassas. He's on line 1. Kevin, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. Yesterday I stopped by a 7-Eleven after work, and I got a 40-ounce Colt 45 because I figured it was going to be an early night. I think I lasted about 30 seconds when the idiots started going on about January 6th and the insurrection. I threw my remote control at the TV. Luckily, I'm not a baseball player, and I missed and hit the wall.
Good.
But as I've always said, Democrats offer no solutions. They're only people of grievance, and they only offer blame. And, one of the most telling things that comes out of that speech last night that tells you everything you need to know about the Democrat Party is rather than a little bit of self-introspection or analyzing their policies on the border and illegal immigration, they're running around today crying about the fact that Joe Biden used the word illegal immigrant or illegal instead of the fact that a beautiful young lady got her head bashed in by someone who wasn't supposed to be here. And all they care about is the semantics. And, the demon cat party is what I refer to them as, have no soul. I don't need to look in their heart. They're soulless. And if you vote for this garbage, then you get what you get.
Well, you're right to notice what they're obsessed with today, big time. They're obsessed with the language of it. They can't believe Joe Biden said illegal. He said something true out loud. That's not allowed anymore because the way to keep power for the left is mind control. Mind control. If you can control the language, you can control your thoughts.
Real quick, her name is Laken Riley, not Lincoln Riley. He's the coach at USC, Joe.
You got to keep telling him. I don't know if it's going to get through. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate the call. I'm glad you didn't spill your Colt 45. It was the controller he threw, not the drink. Thanks, Kevin. All right, hold on. I've got more for you, including the election meddling schemes of the left continue. Joe Biden argued for making our elections less safe, less secure last night. And John Brennan has a big new plan for how the intel community can mess with Donald Trump yet again. That's ahead.